Hello board game brothers and sisters, I'm Adam Singer and welcome to another episode where I'll be letting you know about the board games launching on Kickstarter and Gamefound over the next week. If you're new to the channel, we do this every week going over all the upcoming campaigns, so if you want to stay up to date, this is definitely the place to be. But before we get started, I do like to go over some news and announcements that I just found out about over the past week. I do have a couple really interesting ones for you. The first one is that there is an expansion to Kemet coming in 2024, and they don't exactly say this, but I think it's pretty clear given the font and the imagery that they're using. Obviously, this is just a teaser, so they don't have any info out on this one yet, but of course I will be covering it in more detail when we do get those details. But also from Matago, we do have the next edition of Wyrmspan coming out, and this is going to be called Wyrmspan. Of course, they are working with Stonemaier Games. You can find a lot more info over on Stonemaier Games website as well as signing up for notifications. But of course, this is just going to be building upon that core system established by Wyrmspan, but then introducing a new theme focused on dragons, as well as some thematic elements and mechanisms that will also be introduced with that. This isn't an expansion or anything like that, and it's not meant to replace Wyrmspan, but it will just be giving you a slightly different game that does feature those same elements that you might know and love. Other than that, if you do live in Canada or if you want to visit Canada, I will be attending the ClarinCon convention here in May. So if you're interested in checking out some conventions or if you're in the area and you want to hang out, I'd love to see you there, and I will have links to the convention in the description below if you want to buy tickets. But this, of course, is a very small one, and if it's not worth your time and effort to make it all the way out to Canada for a smaller convention, I do have another one that you might find interesting because there's going to be a ton of cool people attending this event, and this one is the LevelUp event, and this one's hosted by Alex over at Board Game Co. And there's going to be a bunch of different content creators and board game designers, as well as professional GMs who will be hosting Dungeon and Dragons sessions. And there's just going to be a whole bunch of different activities going on, but this one is just all about having fun, meeting new people, making friends, and playing a ton of games. I will be attending this one as well, and I'd love to see you there. And if you are interested in attending, you can check out the link in the description below, which will also get you a small discount on your ticket. Speaking of Alex from Board Game Co., I do work with Alex to keep track of all these upcoming campaigns so that I can give you these videos the most up-to-date info as possible. But then Alex posts a video at the start of each month letting you know of the heavy hitters for that month and what you can expect, and that one did go up for the month of January already. So if you want to go ahead and peek a little bit more into the future, you can find a link to his channel in the description below as well. But also, if you're interested to hear more about war games and historical simulations, you'll definitely want to go and check out Zilla Blitz's channel, because this is almost its own little subgenre of board games, and I don't normally dive into these ones in as much detail as he does, so I do also share my list of games with him as well, and he also puts out a video every single month letting you know of those specific types of games, as well as adding a bunch more that he's aware of that are outside of Kickstarter and Gamefound. It's still early in the year, so we're not quite ramped up to the amount of board games that we normally see launching in a single week, but we do have quite a few launching this week and a couple that I'm super excited about, so let's check them out. And the first campaign we have launches on January 8th, and this one's called Explorers of Navoria. And unfortunately, I won't be referencing Board Game Geek too much in this video because they just happen to be upgrading their servers at the time of me filming this. So their website's currently down, so I'll just have to gather my info and images from wherever else I can find them. But Explorers of Navoria looks like a very interesting worker placement game, because the way that this game works is that players are actually going to be drawing tokens out of a bag. You're going to be drawing 2 tokens on your turn, and then you're going to be choosing one of those to put into play in order to allow you to draw a card of the same color. This image doesn't show up very well, but there will be a few cards face up for you to choose from whenever you do put a token on that associated row. Each of those cards are going to have different actions available to you, as well as different icons that you'll be able to set collect for some bonus actions throughout the game, with each color mostly being associated with a certain set of actions. These actions can allow you to do things like gain resources or money, or to spend those in order to build buildings out on the different locations of the board, but they can also gain you cards that can grant you some ongoing or instant victory point objectives. But I did mention that you're going to be drawing 2 tokens out of the bag, but you're only going to be using 1 in order to gain one of these cards, and the second token that you did not choose is just going to be going into the center of the board. The cool thing about this is that the following player can choose to also draw 2 tokens from the bag and continue their turn as normal, or instead they can choose to just use one of those tokens that are available in the center of the board. Each round is going to consist of each player having 4 turns, and then at the end of the round, players are actually going to be going in reverse order and then choosing tokens that were used on the various decks of cards, and then placing them out in their matching locations, allowing you to take the associated action there, which normally moves you up a track in that specific region, which is one of the main ways to score victory points in this game, because every single round you're going to be scoring based on how far you've traveled down each of the trails in each of the regions. At the end of the game, the victory points that you gained from that, as well as any objectives that you're able to complete on any of those cards that you were able to acquire, are going to be adding up to your total victory points for the game, and the player with the most victory points wins the game. As always, if you are interested in this one, I will have links to the campaign in the description below, and of course you can click to get notified. And launching on the 9th, we have Carolingi, and this is a game for 2 to 6 players that takes about 90 minutes to play. And this is also a campaign that I thought was launching a couple months back, but instead it got pushed off until now. So I did already offer coverage for this one, and I think I did a pretty good job going into detail on how this one plays. So I'll just go ahead and roll that previous footage for you now. And this one is a competitive game where players are going to be moving through Europe trying to gain the most influence in order to win the game. Players start with one location under their control, but then each player is going to have their own personal player board where they're going to be keeping track of their 3 different levels of followers, which they'll be deploying and moving around on the board in order to gain influence and control. But these units can also be upgraded with various actions, because you do need certain units to perform various actions in the game, so you'll be moving them from the different types of followers so that you can be able to perform those various actions. Each round in this game is represented by a single year, which is broken down into 4 different seasons. Each season, players will be choosing 2 actions to perform, but then players will be using all of their actions through an entire year, because these actions are provided through action tokens, and every time that you choose your 2 actions for a season, you're actually going to be putting them into a bag with all the other players' actions as well as some different event tokens that can be drawn as well. And when those are drawn, you're going to be drawing an event card and following the effects. But the neat thing about this is that there isn't any player order, because players are just going to get their actions whenever their token is drawn from the bag, in whichever order those tokens are drawn. But these tiles allow for all sorts of different actions, like leveling up your followers, moving followers from one country to an adjacent country, or even deploying followers from your personal board out onto the main board by assigning them to these cards that will be appearing around the perimeter of the board. And once that card reaches the limit of followers that it can hold, then all the followers on that card are going to be put on the associated country. Players also have action tiles that allow them to develop on areas that they control, which will help them feed their followers if there is a hunger event. And then there is also an action that helps you remove rebel gangs or opponents from areas that you have a majority in, because each country does start out with a rebel faction, and these do increase throughout the game, and those are going to get in your way if they happen to get more of their cubes there than you have, essentially relinquishing your control over that country, which then will limit some of the actions that you can perform. But when an event tile is drawn, an event card is going to be drawn from the event deck. And these can have all sorts of different effects, like adding more cards around the perimeter of the board, adding more rebel gangs onto the various countries, or even causing a famine. And when a famine occurs, players are going to be checking each country that has any followers on it, and then you're going to be removing any followers that exceed the amount of developments on that country +1. Which of the player's followers actually gets removed depends on who has control over that country. But if there is a tie, then all the players are going to be losing their followers equally, even if that means losing more than what you need to get under that threshold. At the end of the round, all the players' tokens would be used, so all the players get their tokens back, but then there's other effects that can happen as well, like adding more event tiles into the bag, which can make those happen more frequently. But then also you could potentially be adding more event cards shuffled into the deck, which can add some other possibilities. The game continues like this until one of the win conditions are met, and that's either controlling enough areas, having enough followers or developments on the board, or just getting enough points. Whenever you do this, you're actually going to be putting your win token into the bag, and if you still fulfill that win condition once that tile actually gets drawn, then you do win the game. And if this one sounds interesting to you, I'll have links in the description below. Also launching on the 9th, we have Monty Python and the Holy Grail, the board game, and this is a game that we don't have a whole lot of info on so far, but it does play 2 to 5 players and takes about 40 to 60 minutes to play. And if we just zoom and enhance on the board here, we can see that there's going to be a bunch of different locations that players can move to in order to take the associated actions, which usually involve gaining or trading in different types of cards for other cards. And it looks like there's 3 different types of cards in this game. There's the quest cards, the grail cards, and the follower cards. The grail cards are going to be allowing you to perform some sort of special action or ability to help you or harm your opponents, while the quest cards will grant you some sort of objective that you can try to complete in order to gain valor, which is what victory points are called in this game. The follower cards look like they're going to work similar to the grail cards, giving you some sort of special ability, but I think they're going to be a little bit more subject to the situation, and with them being actual followers, they might be multi-use, but I'm just speculating here because, like I said, there's not a whole lot of info. But while players are going to be moving around the board and performing those actions to gain different cards, and then also performing the actions of those cards, there's also going to be the Black Knight moving around on the board as well. It sounds like this could be a good or bad thing to you, so you'll probably only want this to happen when you are prepared to fight the Black Knight. But other than that, there is a cool little fun feature in this game, and that's that there is actually a dexterity element, because players will actually be able to get cards that grant them cows that they'll be able to catapult at their opponents. Just like with the movie, I wouldn't be taking this game too seriously. It looks like it's just some silly fun, nothing too competitive, but if you are interested, I will have the link in the description below. Also launching on the 9th, we have Omertà The 5 Families, and this plays 2 to 5 players and takes about 90 minutes to play. And in this game, players are each playing as a crime boss in the 1930s back in New York, and each player is competing to become the boss of all bosses. This is a game where players are going to be taking turns performing their actions, and at the start of your turn, you're going to be drawing a plot card that's going to be granting you some points that you'll be able to spend to perform actions on your turn. You're going to use these actions to recruit and deploy different crew members in order to increase your influence across the board, and also increase your opportunities for illegal income through racketeering. Players can also use their money and actions to build legitimate businesses, which will also gain you some additional income that you can use on things like bribing the police so that they turn a blind eye to you and focus more on your opponents, assuming that you were able to bribe them more than your opponents, or alternatively, you can bribe the news outlets in order to increase your respect, which essentially determines turn order for the following round. Players will also be able to manage their relationships with the other crime lords in the city, and even possibly take some out that might stand in your way. The player with the most victory points at the end of the game wins the game, and if you are interested in this one, I will have it linked in the description below. Also launching on the 9th, we have the Scandinavian Big Box, which is going to include Copenhagen as well as the Helsinki Deluxe editions, and these are both tile placement games I'll get into in a second here. Then there is also the Lancaster Big Box reprint that's also going to be included in this campaign. And because that one is included in the campaign, this one is going to be my own personal pick of the week. And I will come back to that in a second, but first let's explain the Scandinavian Big Box. So like I said, this is going to be including 2 different deluxe games, the Copenhagen Deluxe as well as Helsinki Deluxe. And these games are pretty similar to each other, so I'll just go ahead and explain how Copenhagen plays, but this is essentially a game where on your turn you're going to get a couple actions. You'll be able to use those to gather cards into your hand, or alternatively spend those cards in order to gain a tile of the number of spaces equal to the number of cards that you've spent. But whenever you choose to gain cards, you're always going to be choosing 2 adjacent cards from the display. Each player is also going to have their own personal player board where they're going to be building up those tiles, trying to fill in all the different spaces in order to complete rows and columns for victory points, and also gaining additional points if you're able to fill an entire row or an entire column with windows. So as you're gaining those cards and then trading them in for different tiles, you're going to be immediately placing those tiles onto your board, filling in those rows and columns, and when you do fill in particular rows, there'll also be some benefits that you can gain by choosing different action tiles that you'll be able to spend to perform special actions, or even gain some bonus window tiles that you'll be able to use to fill in empty areas of your board. And that's pretty much how you play the game. The first player to 12 victory points wins, or alternatively, when you get to a certain point in the deck, the game ends immediately, and then the player with the most victory points wins at that point. Like I said, Helsinki does play very similar to Copenhagen, but instead in this game, the way that the card drafting works is that you're actually going to be moving your meeple 1 to 3 spaces around the display, and then you're going to be taking the 2 adjacent cards that are next to your meeple. You might have also noticed that the cards in this game also feature polyominoes, and that's because you're going to be gaining those polyominoes whenever you spend those cards, but then whenever you go to put them out on your board, you're actually going to be sliding them in a particular direction, depending on where your meeple is out on the display board. This makes it work a little bit like Tetris, except for rather than the tiles always coming from the top, you can actually have them coming in from all the different directions of the board. Another neat thing here is that there's also these red tokens out on your board, and whenever you cover those up, you'll be able to gain that token and spend it out on the action board, gaining you an upgrade or special ability that you can use in the game. Just like with Copenhagen, you're going to be gaining victory points for completing full rows and columns, but if you're also able to build superstructures on those rows and columns that you've completed, those are going to be giving you even more victory points. And now for the game that is making this one my personal pick of the week. Even though this one is just a reprint, I just think this is such a fantastic game. This is a game that I should probably really have in my collection, but something that's a little unfortunate about Queen games is that they're normally quite expensive. So I don't know that I'll be jumping in on it for this particular reprint, but I do hope to add it to my collection eventually. But this is also something that can be found on the secondhand market because it has been out for quite some time. That being said, I think the expansions are going to be a little bit more difficult to find, so if you do want to get everything, this might be a good opportunity for it, or to check in at your local friendly game store. But a few things that you should probably know about Lancaster is that this is a competitive worker placement game, and it can feel quite cutthroat, although it's not absolutely terrible, like going to take that sort of way. Instead, players are just going to be fighting over different locations, but that does introduce some of the elegance and interesting mechanisms in this game. Because in this game, there's going to be a whole bunch of different locations out on the board, and players are going to be placing their knights on those locations in order to take the associated action. A really cool feature about this game is that the more powerful knights are actually made with larger tokens, so you can quite easily see who has the most power in a location at any given moment. But whenever it's your turn, you're going to be putting one of these tokens out on the board. But the cool thing is that when it moves on to the next person's turn, if they want the location that you just put one of your workers at, they can actually put a stronger knight there, kicking your meeple back to you and forcing you to put it somewhere else on the board. So you can kind of see the cutthroat aspect here, but it isn't completely terrible because you do get to redistribute your knights that were kicked out back to somewhere else on the board, even though it may not have been your number one choice. But if you do absolutely want that location, you could try to take it back by putting a more powerful knight there than what you're kicked off by, or you can also reinforce your knights with these little white meeples that are known as squires. Each of these squires will increase your strength by 1, but the interesting thing here is that you want to put enough squires that you think you have secured your position, but you don't want to put any more than that because any squires that you use are discarded after you use them, which means that you don't get them back with your knights. So if another player goes there and kicks you out, then you are not getting your squires back and you have essentially just wasted those squires. Once all the players have successfully put all of their knight tokens out on the board, then you're going to be resolving all the different locations, and each location is going to have a different ability, but it's also going to have a different guest token that you can take onto your own personal player board, which I will come back to in a moment here. For any location that you currently occupy, you're going to be choosing to either take that guest token or perform the action, or if you do have the money, you can pay to do both. The different actions can allow you to gain new knights, upgrade your knights, gain additional money, or even build up your castle, which can gain you ongoing benefits throughout the game. And I guess before I get too far ahead of myself, there are a few other different spots that you can choose to put your knights if you don't want to put them out on the main board. You can put them on your own personal player board at your castle, either in the unbuilt parts or the built parts in order to gain the associated benefits. Or you can also send your knights out to these different battles because there's going to be some randomized battle cards out on the board with a certain amount of strength that all the knights need to add up to in order to defeat that battle. And then players are going to be getting victory points based on the proportion of strength that they added there. Another nice thing about going to these battles is that you'll also be able to instantly take a action tile, gaining you with an instant benefit anytime that you decide to spend that tile. But the very last thing that happens before any of these action locations resolve is that players are all going to have a vote on a law to be passed that's going to be affecting some of the mechanisms in the game and some of the available actions to the players. There's always going to be 3 laws in play, but there's also going to be 3 more potential laws that players are going to be voting on in order to put one of those into play, and then kicking out one that is already in play. Players will be voting on the law that they want to enact, but they can also increase their vote by spending some of their tokens that they have acquired from those various guests. Each guest that you gain is going to be adding a voting cube to your supply that you'll be able to spend anytime that you perform one of these votes. The game continues like this for 5 rounds, and then the player with the most victory points at the end of those rounds wins the game. And if you are interested in this or any other games offered in this campaign, I will have them linked in the description below. And launching on the 12th, we have Idols Clash, which is a card game where players are going to be building up their own K-pop group and then trying to win different challenges and do different shows in order to gain victory points, while also using special action cards in order to help themselves and harm their opponents. Not a whole lot of info on this one right now, but if you are interested, I will have a link to the campaign in the description below. And of course, you can click that follow button to get notified once it launches. And that's everything I have for you this week. And this is also normally the part in the video where I'd be offering some sort of pledge giveaways for multiple games on Kickstarter and Gamefound now. But since games are just getting fired up again, I just don't really have any of those right now. But stay tuned over the next few weeks because I'm sure we'll be having giveaways very, very soon. I'm also getting dangerously close to 10,000 subscribers, so if you do watch these videos and you find them helpful and you haven't subscribed yet, I truly do appreciate it. Let's see if we can help get me over that milestone. It doesn't really change anything, but it is a fun milestone to hit, and it does come with that 10,000 subscriber clout. Thanks so much for watching. I hope all of you had a fantastic start to the new year, and until next time, keep that shelf cluttered and the table full.